Hi everyone, just here to do a live with my friend Kris. Hi Kris, how are you?
Morning, how are you doing? Very well, thank you.
Great to
Just get
see
that.
you. I'm creating an audio transcript of our conversation just so that anyone who's hearing impaired will be able to access like an audio transcript
Yeah,
version.
cool.
Just going to hit record now on my laptop. Yes, that's the one. Okay. That seems to be doing it now. Oh, yep, good. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Destination Author with my friend Kris Emery, editorial. That's her Instagram hashtag. And me, Sharyn Holmes. Today, we decided to do a live to celebrate the release of Kris's book, Destination Author, which I'm very excited to talk about and share with you all today. And also to talk about writing practices and various other writing oriented things. So let's see where the conversation goes. Kris, would you love to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit more about you and your work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've probably seen more than most the book happening in the background of my business for a very long time before it's been out there publicly. But I am an editor for non-fiction books. I work primarily with people who are writing a book for their business, which isn't necessarily you've got a business and you're writing a book to slot into the offers that you have. You might actually be writing the book first and creating a business around the book based on your own story. So I get memoir writers who are becoming business people and business people who are becoming authors because they're writing perhaps a how-to or a guide or just some way of sharing their signature system in a way that can get it out to more people than you can work with one-on-one. So those are my clients. Most of my clients have got relatively smallish audiences and are preferring to self-publish as a stepping stone, a first step. Some of them have ambitions to go on to other things, and some people are wholly intent on just self-publishing and not taking their author journey any further than that. So yeah, that's what I help people achieve, getting their book ready for publishing, which is the editing piece, and also a bit of hand holding around that because I'm very conscious that first time authors are beginners in a lot of different bits and pieces. And so that's what Destination Author is really supporting people with, those other bits and pieces that I don't actually necessarily get involved with on a service level, but it's something that everybody needs to know about if they're writing and publishing their own book.
I'm so excited about your book, and I can't wait to start reading it, even though I'm on a very different
Can
publishing
I
journey.
just
But I also, yeah,
show
show everyone the beautiful cover. It's so
It's
beautiful.
so funny because I was actually completely ignorant of the fact that when I ordered my, and this is probably backwards to most people, it's backwards to me, maybe, oh, I wonder if I can, no, that's going to show you the other way. Um, I was completely ignorant of the fact that when I ordered my proof copy, it would have this ugly stripe through the middle. So I was doing all my promotional stuff with this really ugly copy, but now I've actually got the real one in my hands. So yeah, and it's kind of cool because it doesn't matter what publishing journey you're on because 90% of it is going to be the same when you're in the writing part. So yeah, I think this conversation will be relevant to people even who are in your shoes who've got either a deal in progress or have won a competition or just have a big enough audience to go straight into like the traditional pathway.
Mm. And so, when did you start writing your book?
um, so let me think. I came up with the idea a really long time ago, but I'm glad I didn't start then because I wasn't ready to write the book as it turned out to be. I wrote an outline for it probably 2 or 3 years ago. And actually, as I've gone through the process, I've realized I've got two or three, maybe even four different outlines on my computer. And it was actually a matter of finding the right one when I sat down to start writing it. I got serious about it in 2021. So, no, sorry, 2020. So I went to the UK at the end of 2020, and probably around November time, and I dabbled a bit while I was over there. I did already have the introduction, because when I'd done the outline, I'd written the introduction, so that was there. And I went back to it and I was like, oh, actually, I still believe this. I still think this is kind of good. And so that gave me the courage to carry on writing it. And then when I came back from the UK after having like a few bits and pieces falling into place, and a few things that I'd already written in the past fit really neatly into a chapter. So I'd audited like all of the content that I already had out there and slotted it in. After that piecing together exercise, I kind of got serious about writing in about April last year, so 2021. I had 2 weeks in hotel quarantine that to keep myself sane. I started writing, and I used it as a writing retreat of sorts to kind of take control of the fact that I would feel quite trapped. And if it was in any different circumstances, actually I would want to go away and squirrel myself away and have 2 weeks on my own somewhere to write my book. So just because the circumstances were mandated rather than voluntary, I decided, okay, this is actually a really great opportunity to write my book. So I did 2 weeks of writing then, and then I did 2 months of really focused writing in the middle of last year, July and August. And yeah, then that was when the majority of the content was created. So I'd say I started about April last year, like really taking it seriously, but that wasn't when the idea popped into my head. It had been on the back burner, or not even the back burner, but it had been bubbling away there for a while before that. It was really ready to come when I sat down and started focusing on it. Yeah.
All right. And so can you share a little bit more about like the benefits of why one would choose to self-publish? Because obviously with your book, Destination Author, you've chosen to self-publish, and I'd love to hear like some of your reasons around why you've decided to do that. But what are the benefits for anyone listening as to why they might choose the self-publishing path?
Well, I try not to always frame it as a choice of self-publishing versus publishing, because some people aren't really choosing between those two things because they're not really ready for a publishing, a more traditional route or an indie kind of route. So I like to frame it as self-publishing is a stepping stone so that you can build your audience, you can practice publishing, and you can get used to being very visible. Because like I said, when you're writing a book for the first time, you're a beginner in absolutely everything. So
Oh yeah.
there is a lot to get your head around. Even the terminology of the book world can be very confronting and overwhelming. And I remember right when I started editing in this business, I didn't do books to start with. I did like all sorts of communications. And I didn't even and I did like a little practice book, like a small, very like I talk about it in Destination Author, actually, like my bad attempt at self-publishing. And I didn't even really know what the word manuscript meant because it sounded so formal, and I was just like, do they mean just this like Word document that I've got on my computer that I've been typing in? Because it sounded like it should be, I don't know, like a proper printed version of something, or I don't know, sounded way more formal. So a lot of the terminology can be quite overwhelming. A lot of the negotiations with traditional publishing houses or large publishers or even smaller presses are quite time consuming, and they've got a lot of involvement from other people. Now, obviously, those other people are experts, they know the market, but for a lot of people that I work with, a benefit of self-publishing is that have to uh, you don't have anybody else's say so to go ahead and do it. You've got complete creative control. You own all the distribution rights of your book. And I don't want to get too much into rights and distribution, because like publishing is not something that I really know a great deal about in terms of the traditional route, but and those sorts of negotiations. But when you self-publish, you've got complete free reign of how you do it. That doesn't mean that there aren't a few hoops to jump through for getting it on your self-publishing platform, but for the most part, it's a really great way to be able to express exactly what you need to express. And the process is often a lot shorter as well when you're self-publishing. Like, you can finish your book, choose an editor, choose a designer, and manage that process in a matter of months rather than perhaps a matter of years, which certainly with the larger publishers, they've got a timeline, and you might not be, they're probably filling their books for 2023, 2024 right now. So you can definitely move a lot faster, and it's more agile if you're self-publishing. And another benefit is you can use it to build an audience rather than the audience piece having to come first, which is really what traditional publishers are looking for, like that more sizable audience. And because having an audience validates that they're going to sell some of these books.
Yeah.
Whereas as a self-publisher, you can use that low price point product to get in front of more people, to spread the word about what you do. And you often for the first time take your message to more than just a one-to-one, or take your solution, if you like, the thing that you do, the thing that you help people with, you can take that to more people more quickly than obviously being able to work one-to-one.
I have noticed over the years of obviously being someone who's written online for coming up to 10 years now, the way that people choose, go down the self-publishing path in the way that you've said, to build, to build that that audience, to have that engaging audience. And I've also then seen how those who become self-published authors then get a book deal as a result of the audience that they've built, the reputation that they've built through having written a book. And it's quite interesting just being able to, I guess, notice that there are big differences between obviously the amount of creative control you have, the amount of time that it takes for a traditional published book to get out into the world versus everything's on your own timeline. When you choose the self-publishing path, you have not only full creative control, but it can happen much faster. Get it all done.
There is a drawback that I should probably mention here as well, and that's that all the costs fall on you. So let's not pretend that this is like click a button and get it out there. Like, if you want to produce something of quality, there are costs associated with that. And I think something that some people are very afraid of is that they're not going to make their money back on the book. And to a point that might be true in book sales, but there's still reasons for writing a book, because your book sales may not be the thing that make you money, but that doesn't mean that your book is not a very important piece of getting people to work with you. Like, I have, for the first time in 10 years of business, I've sold more than a handful of units of something in like a short space of time, which is very strange for me. I'm really testing my visibility muscles right now. But I've also had, I think, 5 inquiries in the last 8 days since the book has been 10 days since the book has been published. That is like 5 inquiries for editing is quite a lot for me. I usually get like I work with a couple of clients in a month, maybe 4 clients in a month. So to get 5 inquiries in that space of time, that is what will make the book pay off in my case, and in a lot of service providers' cases, because if your audience is only 1,000 people, then even a good conversion rate is going to still be like a relatively small number of copies sold. So and you don't make the full price of the book. Like, for example, my book is
No.
on the self-publishing platform for, I think it's $33 in Australia, and $9 of that is just printing. And then obviously Amazon takes their cut. And then, you know, like by the time you find your break even point, you're having to sell hundreds, maybe thousands of copies, and only 6% of books. And I really should have looked up this resource. I will go and find out where this comes from and put it in the comments of this live afterwards. But only 6% of books sell more than 200 copies over their lifetime. So that goes to show that a lot of books are not going to make their money back in book sales. But you know, so there are drawbacks to it, and you have to weigh up, is this going to be a good tool for me? But lots of the motivations for writing a book aren't about sales, let's be honest.
No,
Lots of
they're
us
not.
have a
Well, not in my
real,
case. Yeah.
yeah, you have to express this. It's just gonna eat you up if you don't get it out there. So yeah, like a lot of us are writing books for many, many more different reasons than just building a business. So yeah, there are lots of personal benefits to getting that out of your body, of your brain, of, you know, and expressing what you need to say.
And when it comes to writing practices, what are some writing practices that have helped you as you've completed your book?
Well, I'm an extrovert, so sitting silently at home is not my jam. And I'm conscious that maybe your audience will not resonate with this at all, but maybe they will. So for me, it's about switching up your environment. I actually say in Destination Author that different people, different types of people need different things to get into flow. And by flow, I mean that state where just time disappears and you could, you know, the lights going down and you're like, oh wow, how did it get to 7 p.m. and I'm still you know, still writing. A lot of people need quiet. A lot of people need to cozy themselves away and have all their comforts. But some people need to see other people, to see movement, to see and have a noisy environment. Like some people love the buzz of a cafe because they can tune it out really easily. Other people, that would just grate on them so much. Some people need to move their bodies. Other people need to have all their ducks in a row, in a sense, like make sure their family is all taken care of before they come to themselves. So there's all sorts of different things that people need. Mine is, I need a fresh environment. I need to not be in my day-to-day. So for me, and I know that writing retreats aren't necessarily accessible to everyone, but we can find our own way of getting into a new environment. So that might be going to the library. I love working in the Queensland State Library, as I've definitely mentioned to you before. South Bank in Brisbane is one of my favourite places to just go and be among a lot of cultural places and that kind of thing. I also love to walk because I generate lots of ideas when I'm walking. And so a lot of writing practices are not actually about sitting down and writing. It's about the things that you do around.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're on the journey, it's not just the writing. And in my Inclusive Leaders Collective, we had a conversation about writing recently, and we were talking about how writing is one part of writing a book, but it's not, well, I guess in the conversation we were having in my group, it wasn't like the biggest part. The biggest part is all of the processing and bringing together of all the ideas to then flesh out what are we trying to say, you know, what's our message. And so I find that the writing process has, for me personally, has been more about the thinking and the reflecting and processing and the remembering too. You know, if we're writing a book that's not fiction, that's memoir oriented, the fact that we have to draw on like years of memories and trying to recall stories and pick the ones, you know, choose which stories are going to have the most impact for the story that we're trying to write and the message that we're trying to share. So it's been quite interesting. It's like, I feel like, you know, because I've been trying to write this book for a few years before I got a publishing contract and trying to put it all together, it was like there are so many other elements required to be resourced to write a book, and that time and space to have, you know, creative time that's going to support the writing flow. That, you know, you mentioned walking, you know, things that we do just in our everyday lives that can help facilitate the writing process are not necessarily writing oriented things.
No.
They're thinking things. Like, I think about ideas in the shower. I might hear a song and hear a few words, and it's like, oh, that's the word I was looking for. Or even just chatting with a friend and then recalling a story that I'd not thought about for the book, but then I'm like, actually, that story would fit really well into a particular chapter. And so the process of writing a book is not just writing, and I feel like it's such a small part of it, particularly, like, as you mentioned before, about focusing on your book, when you were in quarantine for 2 weeks and then taking 2 solid months to write the book, and I've just noticed that it's like I mean, I'm usually mainly always at home, but I feel like I need and I'm an introvert, so for me, yes, I like to be at home, but there's many distractions at home, and you know, noises that I know are just going to happen, and routines that are just going to come up. So through our chats that we've had, I've found that yes, I need to go to other places, because I find that I'm really good. If I was to go to a busy cafe, I'm really good at tuning out noise, because I used to work in an office cubicle and I had to tune out a whole open floor office so that I could concentrate on my work, which was mainly writing oriented and reading oriented. So it's really interesting when you think about, you know, how can we make writing a practice if you're not even thinking about writing a book, but what things are supporting you as you write, whether that's writing your blog or writing your newsletter or writing your social media content. We all have practices that sometimes we don't think about because we haven't documented them, or we haven't created a list of what things support us in order to write. And I'm finding that's kind of what I've been working on the last couple of months, is what things do I need to do so that I'm creatively resourced, so I have the flow and energy and capacity to write. And some of those practices aren't just creative, they're also well-being oriented, you know, self-care oriented things that don't seem very related to writing, but it's those times that you're just going for a walk in nature, or chatting with a friend, or standing in the shower going, why can't I get these words out? Why can't I get this story out? And that's usually, you know, in the most, you know, everyday places where sometimes those ideas have the space to flourish. And because we've been writing during a pandemic, it's like we're more isolated. We don't have that in-person connection and communication that we're so used to. We're having to navigate communicating mainly online on Zoom. So much Zoom, you know, so
and
much
also,
Zoom. It's like me.
Yeah, and I think there's something about how much headspace is taken up by day-to-day problems and all the other stuff going on. It's really hard to be creative when you're worrying about your finances, or when your partner is sick with COVID, or you know, all of these different things. I don't think it's possible to be fully creative all the time, and there's a lot of self-care that does need to happen around your writing. And it's also not even about taking care of yourself and having the headspace to write. It's also about research, like actual research. It's one thing to write something you already know about, but it's another thing to set aside a block of time to research what you're writing about, reading outside of your existing view, you know, your world view, and going and finding books from different perspectives or different genres that you've never really read before. It's all informing your writing practice and your writing ability. And I actually find reading is the most helpful way of writing, but not being sitting down and writing, reading fiction in particular, because I tend to get into work mode when I'm reading non-fiction. So I
Yeah,
will listen to audiobooks if it's non-fiction. But when I'm reading stories, I pick up on things without having that critical editor's eye. So I'm very spongy with language. I notice turns of phrase that I like, and this kind of thing. So when you're a writer, you're usually a curious being, and you're always kind of writing, no matter what you're experiencing,
that
because
is so true.
you're sort of you're observing people, or everything you're doing is kind of informing maybe what you will write. Anything can turn into a story, and
Absolutely.
I reckon we actually overthink story quite a lot of the time. Like, quite often, an example or something that's relevant will be a tiny moment of our day. It doesn't have to be an epic rags to riches kind of journey or like a huge transformation just to be able to get a point across. It just has to map really well with what message you're trying to get across to people. So yeah, like, just by living, you're kind of preparing to be a writer.
Yeah,
um so don't
exactly.
beat yourself up if you're not actually getting words down on the page, I guess, is the message there, because the, no experience is wasted when you're a writer.
No, that's very true. You know, there's lots of things that I've written over the years that I've never actually published. You know, that I've written maybe to, you know, when I used to have a blog that I thought I might put on the blog, or that I was thinking of using as content for social media, and then I've just decided sometimes the writing that we do isn't necessarily for public consumption. Like, it might be
Yeah.
later on in a different form, but it can also be a way of processing. I mean, it's like another
Yes.
form of journaling. Like, I'm not
Mm.
necessarily writing things down, I'm typing them out, but and then having time to edit and review them. But sometimes it's just the process that helps facilitate um, realizations, and maybe a
Yeah.
change in belief or a new thought pattern or something like that. And so not all writing needs to be seen by other people. And I find too,
Yeah.
like with social media, like, we want people to get to know us as people, because we're not just a brand, we're not just like, you know, a few photos on a grid, we're actually full human beings. And um sometimes, and I know I felt this myself, like over the years, you know, people saying to me, I want to know more about you, and you know, if you're a private person, how do you like show up more without feeling overexposed? um
Mm.
and then of course, like, if you have vulnerable stories to tell, or if you have trauma, to not feel like you have to parade that for inspiration, you know, to others. And that's like, there's so many nuances and fine lines to traverse as a writer, because just because you write doesn't mean everyone has to have eyes on your words all the time. You get to curate that and be discerning about what goes, you know, what goes where.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of reasons why not to be too raw and open when we publish, but not least because we can actually do harm to other people. If we haven't processed what's going on for us and given it a little bit of thought, just blurting out all of the crap that has happened to us is not necessarily the best strategy for a number of reasons. But also, if we are building that muscle of being seen, then go way overboard and overexpose ourselves and feel very open to attack, or very vulnerable about something, it can actually make us retreat again and
Mm.
feel like we don't want to be seen. So it can actually have the opposite effect. I think there's a lot of I was going to say role models, but it's kind of the opposite. There's a lot of modeling of air your dirty laundry, be very transparent, but I don't know that transparency is the only measure of uh, good content and good
Mm.
writing. Um, I get a lot of first drafts of memoirs where people have touched on things that they're still in, that they're still processing, that they're still working
Yes.
on, that they're
Yeah.
still very bitter or raw about. And you can tell through the language and through the way that it's been written, that that person is still dealing with difficult things, and that
Mm.
that hasn't passed into the point at which it becomes helpful. And their intention is usually to tell their story in order to be helpful. And I think that's really the difference between personal writing and publishing. It's
Mm.
that intention and the fact that when you publish something, you're assuming an audience. So there is care to be taken there, and that really goes back to what we were saying before about not writing isn't just writing. There's also a lot of looking after yourself in to support you as a writer, like going to therapy or doing any of the necessary care because of what writing actually brings up. So there's the care that you need to have before you write so that you're supported and feel creative, but there's also the care of like what's coming out in your writing and what is it, you know, raising, what issues is it raising for you, or
Mm.
reminders is it bringing up for you that you actually have to go and look after yourself a bit more.
Yeah. I find that sometimes, like through the writing process, and just to share a little bit, in November I had a bit of a writing breakthrough. I had a really difficult story that I wanted to write that's crucial to my story and crucial to, you know, my healing journey and the work that I do now. And it took it took many months between when I last was writing my book last year to then write this chapter in November last year. But I found that it felt good to get it out, and I thought, okay, good, I've had the breakthrough. Now all of the other writing will be easier because I've overcome this one
Mm-hmm.
obstacle, you know, this obstacle of writing a difficult story. But there is no like one recipe to follow when it comes to writing a book. Like, you don't just tick everything off and then you're done. That time to reflect and process on stories, particularly if you are sharing like in a memoir type story, reflecting on things that you hadn't thought about for a long time that are coming up during the writing process, or if it's a new realization that you've had, that those things need time to unfold and unfurl as well. And
Yeah.
with what you were saying before about reading first drafts, and you can tell that someone is still in it. I'm so conscious of that because we've spoken about this in our personal conversations before. I'm so conscious of that. And I just know that there are some things that I know I want to put into a book, but they're not going to go into this book because they are still things that I've been processing over, say, the last 18 months. So
Yeah.
even though people who might know me or who, you know, are supporters in my Ko-fi community might think that I'm going, or might expect that I'm going to be talking about certain things in my book, those things might not be in this book because I'm still processing and reflecting. And the best way that I can do my work as a writer and as a coach in particular is to give myself enough time and space to process and reflect on things that I'm going through and experiencing, to until and sort of delay them until such time when I'm ready to share those in a way that's going to be helpful to the reader. And I think that's really important, particularly
It's
for
so
writing books that are self-help, self-improvement
mm,
oriented, that we,
yeah.
you know, yes, it's great to, if you can boom out a book in like a year or less, good on you. But have you processed all of your stories so that you have the capacity to, one, be able to answer questions about those stories? Because if you get podcast interviews and video interviews, will you be able to answer those questions that are going to come? And you're not going to know the nature of those questions, but if you've written a difficult story, do you have the capacity to hold yourself and hold space for yourself in order to share a bit more about that, to expand on, you know, what might be a very small story in terms of, like, you know, in terms of the context of your book that happened that was deeply personal to you? Can you do you have the capacity to talk about it? And so I'm really sitting with that. I need to reflect more on what it is that I am writing, and am I still in it in a way that's not going to be helpful, or is it, am I processing it and moving through it in a way that is going to be helpful? Because everyone loves a great transformation story.
Yeah.
But when the process of transformation is not comfortable, it's not easy, can be challenging and painful, and also triggering if it's related to trauma. So that time and space is really important. As much as you might like to get your story out, whether that's in a blog post or on a Instagram story or post, or if that's a book, you need time to process and just like let it happen. And I know that the book that I originally had the idea for, like in 2017, is a very different book to the book that I'm writing now. Some of the content is the same. There's a general flow of themes, but it's certainly evolved and changed over time. And I wouldn't, if say I had decided to self-publish 3 or 4 years ago, or if I'd got a publishing contract a couple of years earlier, I could honestly say that I probably wouldn't be happy with the story that I'd written at that time, because there was so much learning and expansion that's happened and growth that's happened since that time, that you need to have, there needs to be breathing room, you know, there needs to be space around it, you know. It's kind of
There's
like
definitely first book remorse. That's a real thing.
I'm so scared of
People,
first book remorse.
I think people do publish too early sometimes in this desperation to have a book. And there's a massive difference between embodying being an author and having a book, because you need to have it's a completely different energy. It's coming from a place of what you can get rather than what you can give. And I noticed that a lot when people talk about books in terms of ticking something off, I guess. And there's what you were just saying about the transformation taking time and needing time to process and that kind of thing. It's like it's, I think, a product of how often we are told that we need to have this, create a transformation for someone in our businesses. So everyone's desperate to have that transformation story. This, I'm talking about online entrepreneurs for in the large part. They're desperate to have that transformation story that they can use to sell the thing that they're selling. I notice this in a lot of like health coaching and other kinds of coaching. And it's not necessary to publish your stuff the second you've been through it. It's a lot more helpful, and not even helpful, but just more responsible to have done a little bit of, you know, thinking through where this is all going. And sorry, it's distracting me because it's just started absolutely chucking down in a split second here. You're the other side of town, so it's either come from your way or coming your way.
Oh, it hasn't come here, but it's very grey out here.
Yeah. I just, if you can hear any background noise, that's what it is. Yeah, so there needs to be time taken, and you don't have to rush this out the door. You don't have to rush your expertise out the door or your experiences out the door, and you definitely don't have to rush your book out the door. Just because you can go faster with self-publishing does not mean that you have to write a book quickly. And yeah, like I said, I think that comes from this desire to have a book rather than to go on a journey of learning to be an author and learning to write and understanding everything that creates a good quality book.
And I think too, with the online business entrepreneurship community, when it comes to writing books, there's just this underlying tone of monetizing the fuck out of everything.
Yeah.
So and
I
to
need a
know
book.
that,
I have to have my
yeah,
book. Like, it's just a real
yeah,
box ticking exercise.
yeah,
And yeah, there's something incongruent about that for me. Like,
mm,
a lot of people say you need to write a book in order to become an authority on something. And I would question which way
mm,
round you're putting that. Like, if you're not an authority on something, should you be writing the book? Like, the idea of authority is baked into the term author. You know, they've got the same roots. It's all about owning your expertise, but owning expertise can only come if you have those expertise, which is not to say you have to have qualifications or any formal writing training. I'm not trying to make this inaccessible to people. You are, by virtue of the fact that you've lived through things, the go-to person on those things, but it's just a matter of how you're presenting them and not shying away from just doing the hard work of the research and those sorts of things. um,
mm.
it's very well writing a book that is anecdotal, but inform yourself of the wider debate and situating your book in the broader context is really important. um, I do sometimes get manuscripts that are just like, I think this, I think that, and it's a lot of opinion. And
Mm.
that's another reason that I encourage reading more widely, because when you only read the type of books that people in a very small circle are writing, then yeah, that you're not really getting the richest experience that you could as an author.
Mm.
And there's definitely a lot to be gained from reading widely, or at least it doesn't have to be reading books necessarily. It can be, um, you know, listening to audiobooks or however, like other ways of just forming your argument by getting outside of your like a really blinkered small
Yeah,
community.
I understand what you mean, sort of outside the bubble. And I think,
Bubble, yeah, that's a good way of
yeah,
putting it.
I find from what you're saying too, just, and particularly because we know what the publishing industry largely looks like, why it is so important to read books by diverse authors. You know, people,
Yes.
if you're reading memoirs, stories by different people from all different identities, not just people who necessarily look like you, but other people as well, and different genres too. You know, not just self-help books. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this recently. Just in terms of self-help books, I'd never read a self-help book until I was, oh, how old would I have been? 34. Never
Yeah.
even looked at one. And then I realized that none of those books that I was reading for those few years, you know, from about, say, 2012 till 2016, none of those books were written for people that look like me. And I really find I need to really mention this, because there is so much self-help, self-improvement stuff out there that is through a very, very narrow lens and through a very, very narrow privileged gaze. And that advice is not going to work for everybody. So it's so important that when we're looking for guidance, when we're looking for expertise, that we largely look outside of, you know, outside of the realm of whiteness, given that the publishing industry is so white,
Yeah.
the traditional publishing industry, that we need to and I really love your advice about, you know, reading different genres, you know, reading outside your bubble, because, you know, it's language, you know, we learn different types of language through how different people write and their experiences, and to broaden our worldview. And I think that if we do that, our story is going to shift. We're not going to be writing the types of books that have come across your desk with a lot of opinions and I statements. We're going to be seeing more books that are written from a place of wisdom, where someone has actually looked at the world and been able to contextualize their story and their experience and expertise and find their place in the world, not just think that their place is the only place.
Yeah.
And so I'm really noticing that, because I read online, I read from a lot of different people. with a lot of different experiences and backgrounds and identities. And I find that that has enriched my world, and that helps the richness of my writing, because it helps me expand my own way of thinking. It helps me to think differently and more broadly and more expansively. And once you sort of broaden that lens, it never narrows again. You don't go back to the same bubble ever again. You can't.
Yeah.
So
And I think books are such a fantastic vehicle for experiencing the world through different lenses without having to even go anywhere.
yeah.
I for my 40th this year, I did a 40 book challenge of world literature, reading stories from authors from around the world in lots of different cultures. And I learned so much while the borders of Australia were closed. And I went to Madagascar, and I went to, oh gosh, where else did I go? Iraq and New Zealand, just from my armchair. And it's such a fantastic way of being able to know different people who have experienced things completely different from ourselves, and to broaden your views very, very accessibly, very inexpensively. Like, the library is one of the best resources that we have, and one of the last public spaces where you don't have to pay for anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I'm a massive believer in supporting your local library for various reasons, but in particular for being able to have those different perspectives, or even realizing how similar other perspectives are to your own, but coming from a completely different place. Like, finding commonalities between different peoples is equally important. So yeah, stories from all over the world can move you and inform you and broaden your horizons, even without being able to go anywhere.
Yes, I know, and that's especially important right now. So I guess the message there is to support your local library, and also you can influence what books they buy. So if there are books you want to read and they're not on the shelf, you can make a suggestion about what you'd like to see on the shelves. And like, the whole world is there in a library. That's really, really special. And the fact that it's accessible to everyone as well. Like, it doesn't matter if you can't afford to buy books, the access is there at your local library. And I actually find, like, and just, I guess, because in living in Brisbane, one thing that I was really surprised about when we moved here, like 11 years ago, was the fact that you could, if there was books that you wanted to read but it wasn't at your local library, you could organize to have that. You could go online, say you wanted a particular book, and they'd actually deliver it to your local library, and then you could go and pick it up from your local library for like 30 cents.
Is that not a thing in Sydney?
I mean, I don't think it was. I mean, I loved the library when I was a kid. I went to the library every week when I was a child, but I don't recall. Maybe they changed that later on.
It was definitely a thing in Auckland when I lived there, but I don't think I ever went to the library in London. So in the cities where I've lived, it's such a blessing to have libraries available to us. They are not always well funded, and they aren't always, kept in certain areas. Like, there are some places where library funding is not very well supported. So that's a shame, but we have to use them if we do have access to them. Otherwise, they will diminish. And the other thing that I notice about libraries and secondhand bookshops, actually, is not just the number of different places you can go and perspectives you can have, but the absolutely incredible array of things that people are interested in. If you're ever concerned that your book is not interesting to people, or that you're too niche, or have got like a really obscure viewpoint on something, go to your local library and just check out the amazing human interests there, because like it blows my mind every time. I went to my local we've got like a secondhand book warehouse where I live, and just going through the shelves of all these different subjects, like there's books on training your dog right next to books on how to bake the perfect muffin. Like, no book is too obscure to write. Believe me, there's everything out there, and people have bought these books, you know, and they're getting a new lease on life by being in um the secondhand bookshop as well. So yeah, definitely go check out, just hang out around books is my biggest tip. If you're a writer, just go and absorb being around books, because one day you're going to expect people to buy your book, and you need to know what it's like to have the experience of being an avid reader.
Yeah, it's I just think about, you know, being a child, and just how much I love stories, you know, and to think,
Yeah.
and I never thought as a child, as a little kid, that I would be someone who would then go on to write my own story and then become an author. So,
Yeah.
you know, just I find that it really, I feel really connected to my inner child as a result of writing, because it's like I might not be writing the kinds of stories I loved as a child. I still love those same stories, and I watch them in movies and film and stuff like that. But at least, you know, that fuel of that creativity of being in all of those different worlds has helped me want to become a writer. And so that's my journey, but everyone's journey to writing and becoming an author is different.
It
But
really is. Yeah.
like you said, being an avid reader is a great place to start. And it doesn't matter if you haven't been an avid reader, if you wouldn't regard yourself, if you don't regard yourself as a bookworm. If you start reading different books now, they will help expand your views, and give you probably a lot more motivation to express your story and write your book, if that's what
Yeah.
you'd like to do.
I really love that, because when I was a kid, we were encouraged to read, but it wasn't really encouragement. It was like forced on us, and we had to get through a certain number of books from the library. This is at my primary school. We had to get through a certain number of books, but we were told that they had to be novels, and I was much more interested in nature and wanted to read non-fiction, but that was not something that we could elect to do. It had to be novels. So it really put me off writing,
Oh,
sorry, put me off reading for a time, because we'd be tested on it. It became a have to, rather than something that we were encouraged to explore for ourselves and find out what we liked. It became box ticking and getting through stuff. And as a rebel personality, that as soon as I'm told I have to do something, I want to do the opposite. I get a lot of resistance to things that become an obligation. And so, but I was so willing to read certain things that I was interested in. And it's actually quite interesting how I've ended up being a nonfiction editor, as opposed to, like, I love reading fiction now, but it was not a strong part of my identity for a really long time. And I even remember being at university and having guilt around reading anything that wasn't uh, course related. Like, I felt like if I was going to be reading, it had to be something useful that was going towards um, what I was learning about. So I didn't read fiction for a really long time, but actually I've learned probably most about non-fiction through reading just all sorts of different things. And reading widely has obviously made me a much better editor. And I don't have to read the genres that I edit in order for those books to be really, really useful. So I would say exactly the same thing for writers.
Yeah, I as someone who, I would almost say that I'm a book collector. If I can buy books, I will buy books.
Oh, yeah, but that's a totally different thing to reading them.
I want to have my own library. I have this image in my head of one day, eventually, hopefully, owning our own home and having just a wall of books.
Yeah.
You know, every book I've read. It's not necessarily literature, it's all kinds of books, you know, but just, you know, to be able to have them all there.
And your one will be on those shelves as well.
And yeah,
I actually have a shelf on my bookshelf that is all the it's 2 shelves now, all the books that I've been sent from clients over the years. And not everybody does send me their book, but you know, maybe I guess maybe a third to a half of people actually like send you a physical copy. So that's really cool. I've got a good little collection there, and my book is going on the shelf next to those ones.
That's so special. Or I celebrate you for getting Destination Author out during a pandemic.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking, but it's done now.
Well, everyone that's joined and everyone that listens to the replay, if you're someone who's on a writing journey yourself, I highly recommend you read Kris's book, Destination Author. I will be reading it. I'm sure it'll give me even more great tips than what we've discussed, you know, in our private conversations. Yes, that's the cover. And if you're someone who would like some more support around your vision, around expressing your message, I have my visionary coaching offerings available at the moment. Kris, thank you so much for joining me for this live today, sharing more about your book and writing practices. I hope this motivates and encourages everyone to think about their message and express it, whether it be through undertaking the journey as an author, or maybe even just broadening your reading so that you can write more expansively online. Thank you so much for joining.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on Destination Author.
Yes,
so exciting. I'm so excited for you.
So cool. Thanks, Sharyn.
Thank you, Kris. Bye.